Thanks for joining me, everyone. Monday through Friday, 12 noon and beyond. I'm a little early today, but that's how internet works. You can turn the thing on anytime you want, and off you run. And my guest is David Fisher. David is he's a ghostwriter. He's a writer. He's a columnist. He's written books both in his own name and also for many well-known people across the board. Very interesting. Johnny Cochran, William Shatner, George Burns. I mean, a lot of entertainment figures and politicians. And I'm interested in the writing process. First of all, each project. I mean, when you write a book, you go deep. I mean, you really can learn. There's no better way to learn a topic than writing a book. So, David, I guess that can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I suppose we might as well go right off the bat with the main issue here, which is that you ghost wrote a book with former President Donald Trump. And I want to know, I mean, my sense is, and I have no idea because I think I interviewed Trump once for like 5 minutes back when he was a candidate, but I get the sense that he is very involved in not only his books, but his speeches and his public his public press releases. It's not like probably some politicians which really don't get involved in it. They sort of they delegate it. Is that the case, and was that the case with your experience?
Well, it was a very interesting situation. My politics tend to be very liberal,
Mhm.
but I have a reputation in publishing. But I have a reputation in publishing for being able to produce a book quickly and professionally.
Yes.
And so when Trump announced he was running for president, um, Viacom CBS wanted to publish his candidate's book, and it literally had to be done in a month. And they called me, and I live in New York, and we New Yorkers knew Donald Trump,
Right.
and did not take him very seriously. We knew he was sort of a blowhard. Um, and the only fear I had when I agreed to do it, because I thought he was an interesting guy, was that he would drop out of the campaign before the book was published.
Right.
And so I spent time with him and found him to be the strangest combination of megalomaniac, in that he needed constant affirmation of his own righteousness and goodness and intelligence, and at the same time, the most insecure person I had ever met.
Mhm.
Um, it seemed like there was no center there. And, through the years, when I would read these stories in the media about Trump's strategy, I would laugh because I knew there was no strategy. There's not the intelligence there to create a long-term strategy. It's everything he does is from the gut. It's inspired. He believes it. He feels this way. He may not feel this way in an hour, but that's the way he feels right now. And that's what he says. And it was, I mean, working with him was actually fascinating.
Well, I mean, as I said, I might have spoken to him for like 3 minutes when I was doing an early morning radio show many, many, many years ago. But I did read The Art of the Deal, and I read some of his other works. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I sense that there is some consistency there in terms of the things that he talked about even back then, and the things that he advocated for as president. I mean, in a way, I mean, most politicians that I've observed, they tend to go with whatever they think is going to get them, you know, on the right side of the media and popular. And, Bill Clinton was famous for that. He would call his pollster every morning and say, "Who am I?" And they would look at polls and they'd say, "Well, this is going this way, so you need to do this." Whereas with Trump, I mean, look, again, I don't know him. You've had more direct experience, but he was talking about the same things back in the 1980s, that he talked about as president. I actually think that there is a consistent set of principles there. I don't know if he's not a deep philosophical type for sure, but there does seem to be a gut thing that he does seem to stick by, and he doesn't seem to care whether or not it's going to be popular. He just runs with that. Is my perception on that wrong?
Well, you used a key word there, which is popular. And in order to understand what's popular, you have to be a participant in the world. And he was not. If you can visualize living in a huge bubble, and he mastered the art of bringing people into the bubble
Right.
by making them promises. If you do this, if you do that, you'll get this, I'll do that. None of the promises he ever intended to keep, by the way. I mean, that was one of the things, because so many of my friends had worked with him and not been paid or had a fight to get paid. The deal that I made at the very beginning was that I would be paid directly by the publisher. I didn't want him, because I simply knew he didn't pay his bills.
Right.
And so when you talk about having a set of principles and being popular, he may have a set of beliefs. And all those beliefs are based on what's best for him. But the concept of being popular means understanding and pursuing what is generally considered popular. And he was oddly unaware of what was going on around him, common knowledge. I mean, on several occasions, somebody would mention something in the news or something very common, and he had no idea what they were talking about.
Mhm.
I always visualized him as the snake oil salesman selling bottles of Mrs. Murphy's elixir off the back of a Conestoga wagon. And whatever, if somebody said to him, is this going to cure my rheumatism? The answer is, this is the best cure for rheumatism you will ever see.
Right.
Whatever he needed to say to get the response he wanted, that's what he would say. And there was
Well, yeah.
nothing based in reality.
I mean, I think that he has a typical personality of a salesman and of a kind of, maybe a bit of a huckster, I suppose you could say, but he knows how to market and sell a product, and does it amazingly well. Trump has been accused by his detractors of lying a lot and of not telling the truth, right? And I think that this is partially true in that, he's the kind of guy that you might meet up with at a Thanksgiving dinner, and he's going to talk about a big fish he caught in a vacation, and it's way exaggerated. And he embellishes and he exaggerates on things like that, things that are like personal, and the biggest crowd ever, and this and that. And I think that discredits him. I mean, I hold that against him somewhat, but I think on the bigger issues, he was painfully honest. I mean, he wasn't going to lie about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which led to the Vietnam War. He didn't lie going around the country saying, if you like your health care, you could keep your health care. If you like your doctor, you could keep your doctor, knowing that was a lie. He didn't, in other words, I think that the objection that the his enemies, what he called the deep state, I mean, what Eisenhower called the military industrial complex, what C. Wright Mills called the power elite, it goes by different euphemisms, that their objection to Trump was that he was honest, and he would blurt out things that were going on, in the real stuff, the things that actually matter, the things that could lead to, life and death, the things that could lead to, real crisis. So, I think that the charge that he was dishonest was really, not only unfair, but it was very relative. It had more to do with an attempt to try to undermine him. And you notice that, like, for example, CNN and some of the major networks, what he calls the fake news, they actually had like a truth counter on the screen every time he spoke, and they'd interrupt his speeches. You'd hear, Brian Williams suddenly break in and say, "Oh, well, this is untrue." That's all gone now. Now that Biden's president, they took that down. Nobody questions. Not that he makes any kind of comments that have any coherency either way, but the point is that this idea of putting someone under a microscope and parsing every word and saying, well, he said that this happened on March 2nd. It actually happened on March 3rd. You see, he's lying. That's gone now. We don't hear that now. What say you?
Well, once again, it comes back to perception. There is the perception that the president of the United States comes to that office with a unique set of abilities. And when you hear the president of the United States make a comment or take a position, generally, it's factually based. You may not agree with the position, but he has arrived there based on understanding a set of facts. That was not true with Trump. With Trump, it's just who's going to say the nicest things to me, who's going to like me more. His relation, the Russians figured it out very early. If you compliment him, he will do whatever you want, or he will say whatever you want. He may not do it. He may change his mind 5 minutes later. It's interesting, Charles. I just finished a book with to be published next year about Nixon, working with someone who was extremely close to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it because I've always found Nixon to be one of the most extraordinarily interesting people of my lifetime.
Oh, sure.
And coming away from that, and I thought I knew a bit about Nixon, but I had to do a tremendous amount of research. And I found Nixon to be an extremely bright person.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
With serious personality defects. And I also, I worked with Ann Romney on her book about her disease, and got to know and like Mitt Romney quite a bit.
Sure.
And I've always felt that Mitt Romney was a victory of ambition over character. In that if the Mitt Romney that I spent time with had been the candidate, even me, this liberal Democrat,
right,
could have found my way to vote for him. Very smart, decent, good guy. But because of where he was on the political spectrum, he had to please a certain group, and he became this odd character. Bringing that all around to Trump, the personality defects overwhelms everything else. And he's also, I'll say it over and over, he's just not very smart. He just isn't. And this isn't me sitting here saying, look how smart I am, because I'm average intelligence, maybe a little more, I hope, but generally average intelligence. And I was astonished at some of the things, silliness. And I didn't spend that much time with him, but some of the things that came out of his mouth, and where one of the things in the book that we did that I found so interesting, because I actually don't think he even read the manuscript. But what he insisted was that there be pictures of every one of his buildings in the book. Okay. And at first I laughed at that, and I thought, what an egomaniac. And then I began to understand it isn't that at all. Well, it is, but more than that, Trump understands his supporters. in a way that very few people, much less politicians, have ever understood his supporters. He knows they believe or want to believe the myth that he established about himself. This extraordinarily wealthy, brilliant businessman. And by including the pictures of those buildings, he reinforced that myth.
Sure.
He was showing, you know, a lot of those buildings he had little to do with. He sold his name because he's a brilliant merchandiser.
Yes.
Or he was. The brand is done, I think. But
Well,
but
the
it
brand,
was,
I think, was done the minute he stepped off that escalator.
yeah, yeah.
And look, I mean, my experience is pretty limited in politics in that I ran for Congress in Massachusetts, and I did a full-fledged campaign and I debated my opponent, who was a very prominent figure in this state. And it gave me some insight into the character of people on all sides of the political spectrum. Again, this is my anecdotal. I mean, I'm going just like you're going from your experience with talking to people, in that they're all, to a certain degree, egomaniacs. I mean, when you have the media calling you and asking your opinion about this and that. And I mean, a good example of that, with due respect to him, he's a nice man, was Michael Dukakis. The Globe was puffing him up, brilliant, great, you know, I mean, every day, and to the point where it really went to his head and he started to believe it. And, you know, there's an ego massage to getting attention from the media and getting reporters calling you and running a picture and doing nice articles, even attacking you, where you start to get an outsized and unconnected to reality sense of your own importance. And a lot of these people will then compromise in order to keep that going because it's like a drug. You know, I became addicted to it. It's very intoxicating, you know, and you start to make these little, and Mitt Romney is a good example of that, you know, because I'm in Massachusetts. I also knew Mitt Romney. I've had many encounters with him. You know, you begin to do things and shape your thinking and your ways in a certain way that's going to conform to what's going to get you that continuation of that high, of that experience, of that platform. And, you know, again, I think that describes most of these people on both sides of the aisle, both political persuasions. I actually think that Trump is different than that. I think he's not into that. He has that already. He already is famous. He already was a multimillionaire. He already had this incredible family. He had all of the great gifts that anybody could hope for in life. You know, he's had a few bumps in the road, but, you know, for the most part, he lived an incredible life. And I think that he actually, I mean, maybe this is naivete on my part, but I think that he entered it because he actually did, you know, it's kind of like toward the end of your life, he actually felt like he wanted to do something for the country. He didn't need to do it. He could have continued on in his Mar-a-Lago and his beautiful family. I mean, he didn't care about attention. He had that. I mean,
Charles, I really have to disagree with you.
Okay.
And I think that when I talked about the psychological aspect of Trump, the insecurity. I'm not a psychiatrist, obviously.
I understand.
But the insecurity is so enormous that the void is never going to be filled. The curse of being Donald Trump is that he will never, ever be satisfied. You know,
It also describes him in a sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would, because I think his insecurity is so great that he himself, and I don't know this is just what I'm imagining, but I think he has very little respect for his supporters, because I think he has not a particularly high opinion deep inside of himself. And I think he knows, if I'm able to fool these people, you know, I need more, I need bigger. There's never enough money. There's never enough acclaim. There's never enough attention. You know, conversely, I did a book with a guy named Robert Wexler, who at the time was the most liberal congressman in the House
Okay.
from Florida. And he was an extraordinary, because I wanted to understand how the House worked, even when you were in the minority, as he was. And he was is an extraordinary person who set out to do good things for the most possible people, and eventually had to leave Congress because he needed to make money to put his kids through college.
Right.
And it just didn't pay enough. Other people have found ways around that, and I look at people like Stacey Abrams, and I think, now, has she been doing everything that she's been doing for so many years because she wants power, because she wants personal attention, because she loves,
Partially, yeah, I think
you
so.
know,
And money.
I
Carolyn
mean,
It's come out, she's a multimillionaire. And
yeah,
she just,
I think she's just a true believer and an extraordinary human being. And we have a guy in New York now, Eric Adams.
yes.
I don't think he became a cop knowing he was going to go into politics. I think he became a cop because he thought he didn't like what he saw in policing. He didn't like what he saw, the way the police and the Black community were relating to each other. So I don't agree with you I think when you say most, okay, let's say many
Right.
politicians love it, but I think there are exceptions. And I think,
Well, I think, again, you and I may not agree, but I think Trump is one of those because
yeah,
he already made his money. He already made his fame. And, you get people, I mean, look at the Clintons or Obama. I mean, they made a lot of money from their office. They used their offices to enrich themselves. Look at, I think Biden is even worse in that he actually literally had deals with foreign governments while he was sitting vice president to
well,
strip for money. I mean, in a way, at least Trump, for better or for worse, he already made his bucks. He actually lost money. I mean, his daughter had to shut her doors to her company because Saks Fifth Avenue wouldn't carry her pocketbook anymore. I mean, it was, his brand was destroyed. I think that, he didn't have to have that. I mean, the level of hostility and the boycotts and the hate that he and his family had to put up with, they didn't get. I mean, to my way of thinking, it's actually, and there's an interesting other side of that story.
yeah, but Charles, it had always worked before. I mean, look where it got him to. And he simply did the same things that he had always done. He set things up. When it got too uncomfortable, he walked away from them. He would say whatever the crowd needed to hear when they needed to hear it. He would throw things out. If it got a response, he would say it
All right,
again.
you and I, David, disagree with that. I disagree with you on that because I think you could see videos of Trump on television in the 1980s saying the exact same things that he said as president. I mean, I actually think that on those standards, he was fairly consistent in his beliefs in putting America first. And the difference is that other presidents, the Bushes, Obama, they all said these things, but every one of them gave State of the Union addresses where they all said, we're going to cut down on the illegal aliens, we're going to secure our borders, and everybody would go, yay. Trump actually meant it. He actually said these things, and he wasn't lying, in other words. He actually meant it. Now, psychology-wise, I mean, again, we don't want to be armchair psychologists, but when you describe insecurity, again, from my own limited experience in Massachusetts running for Congress against Mon-Fri, I saw that on all sides. Very insecure people needing the massage. They would get upset if the media wasn't calling after a few days. They would do things to get that to happen. They would have press, they all had like press departments that this is all they did, raise money and get media attention. And whatever they had to do to get that is how they did it. I mean, again, I just think that Trump, yeah, sure, insecure. He shouldn't have been bragging about having a bigger fish than his neighbor. I mean, I do hold that against him. And I think it was unnecessary for a man of his accomplishment. It kind of was like a little bit of a piece of mud on the portrait. But I would argue that for the most part, his character and his ego and everything seemed to be pretty consistent. And, you know, he wasn't involved in any of these kinds of scandals that you saw.
Well, on some level, you're attributing a degree of altruism to him.
I am.
And that's probably where you and I would
Okay.
separate the furthest, in that I think the first question that he asks every time about everything he does is, what do I get out of it? And not am I doing something that is the most good for the most people? What do I get out of it? If I take this stand about the border, what do I get out of it? Well, here's what
I disagree with you. It makes me think of when Bill Clinton was approached by the National Security and they said, we know where bin Laden is and we can take him out. What should we do? He was like, well, we don't get anything out of it politically, so let's do nothing.
I'm not defending anybody else.
I think Trump thought in those terms. He wasn't thinking, how is this going to look to, you know what I mean? The stuff that he was doing was not winning him any favors. He wasn't. I mean, he brought peace between Israel and 5 Arab countries, and nothing was said about that. Well, I'm just saying, he wasn't. He knew that what he did, he wasn't going to get rewarded for it. He presided by any objective measure, however it happened, whether he was personally involved or not, he presided over an extraordinarily successful presidency on foreign issues, on domestic issues, on security, all of it. Now, maybe that might have been luck, you could say, but I would suggest that it did have something to do not only with his policies, but with some of the people that worked with him, including, and he had some pretty people around him that were not exactly, playing ball.
Well, there are certain things he did that turned out okay, no question about it.
Right.
But the concept of actively trying to take affordable health care away, making education more expensive, making the divide between the rich, $1 trillion tax cut, 88% of $1 trillion tax cut went to the top 2% in the United States. There's nothing healthy about that.
Debate. I mean, I recall a lot of people complaining about the fact that he forced wealthy people to pay taxes on their vacation homes. They said, "Oh, that's because they're the blue states. He's penalizing rich." It was a tax on the rich, and also some of the business. He basically did not raise taxes, which resulted in an economic boom, particularly for African Americans in this country. I mean, I disagree. I mean, I think that his policies were not necessarily from his own education, but he consulted with good people who understood how to stimulate an economy and how to help working people, how to protect labor and how to protect industry against the dumping by foreign countries like China.
But Charles, conversely, we had a $3 billion soybean market that disappeared. And where did it go? It went to Russia. $3 billion. And we end up subsidizing our farmers now $25 billion a year.
Through tariffs from China. And also we protected.
No. He put tariffs on soybeans that made them too expensive for China. He did the same thing with lumber coming in from Canada. Mm-hmm. He put completely unnecessary. Did he do it with Russia? Absolutely not. What he did with Russia is he picked out some oligarchs, and perhaps he got a list from Putin, who Putin's competition is. I don't know, but he picked out certain oligarchs and he put sanctions on them. But he put no sanctions on the Russians per se, not on any Russian products. He did nothing about their adventurism.
Unlike China, Russia might. Well, first of all, he did. He supported finally Ukraine, even though they had seized the under Obama.
His China policy
cut millions of dollars of payments from a Russian oligarch, and he also did not approve of a pipeline from Russia to Germany while shutting down one from Canada to New Orleans. Now we have an energy deficit for the first time, and he presided over energy parity in this country, probably for the first time in our industrial age. So no, he actually was pretty tough with Russia. This is a kind of a myth. Now, you could pick out one thing where maybe there was a tariff that might have been a bad policy, but for the most part, Russia was contained. Now Russia has driven the US Navy out of the Black Sea. Now they're amassing troops along the border of Ukraine. Now they're aggressive in Europe. That didn't happen because Trump, they respected Trump. So
No,
Biden goes and he meets with Putin and he says, please stop, sabotaging the our internet. Please stop with the spyware. And Putin, then he's like, he laughs at him. It's a natural joke.
Charles, do you know what has happened to the group that did that? This last internet?
Are you talking about with the Colonial Pipeline?
They've disappeared.
Good. Well, that's
They've disappeared.
But
in other words, somebody did something, and maybe it was Russia, maybe it was us, but it was taken care of quietly.
It just happened in Boston. They just had one last week.
No. This is what I'm talking about. This last week, these people who did this thing last week, the concept that Russia was contained, they were massing troops on the Ukraine border.
No, they were not.
Yes, they were.
They started doing that in April.
Absolutely, they started last year. Okay. They started last year. They were consolidating. Now the truth is, I may agree with the Russians. Those are Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, and that's an area that has gone back and forth. But the concept that Trump contained Russia, I just don't buy it. And let me go one little step further.
Yeah.
Rather than China suffering, China's GDP last year was 6.7 growth, the largest it had had in more than a decade. So no, they were not contained. The balance of trade between us and China is greater under Trump than it was ever in history. His China policy was a disaster.
Not at all.
Economically.
It was the only time since probably Mao Zedong that our government actually did take a stand against Chinese economic imperialism in the form of dumping cheap products. And it did have a positive effect, both in terms of preserving American labor, but also in terms of taxation that resulted from that tariff that, yes, probably compensated some companies that took a hit because of the tariffs. But either way, those are issues that you and I can debate over. We can, people have legitimate opinions on both sides. I mean, I think that it's economic nationalism is good for any country. Certainly China and Germany and Japan have high tariffs, because you protect your labor and you protect your industry. But other people say, no, they're totally for unfettered free trade. That's fine. Those are arguments. I think that to try to frame these arguments in the context that somehow the other side is, involved with like cruelty.
Well, but the statistics, this economic boom, for the last 3 years of the Obama administration, they created an average of 204,000 jobs a month for 3 years. Trump never reached that number.
And it took 8 years for them for the economy to gradually.
Well, because we came out.
When Trump was elected, it was like a lid blew off, and the things started to boom. And it wasn't necessarily because of anything he did. It had more to do with this economic sense that finally there's going to be an administration that's going to be pro-business. It's going to reduce onerous regulations. It's going to hold the line on taxes, and it's going to protect American labor and industry. And even the psychological part of that, because Wall Street deals with a lot of psychology, resulted in an incredible boom for 4 years. Anybody who has a 401c3 knows that. Now,
the numbers just don't support that. Obama.
How do they do?
When Obama became president, the stock market was at 7,000. When he left the presidency, it was at 19,000. When Trump took office, it was at 19,000, and he got it up to 27, 28,000. I mean,
And he also reduced
and
the domestic product to over 3%, which Obama said would never
well,
happen.
no, actually,
And he reduced unemployment to less than 2%, which Obama said would never happen, particularly among African Americans.
well, if you remember when Romney ran for president, his goal was to get unemployment. This was Romney running
Right.
against Obama. His goal was to get unemployment down to 5.7%. Obama got it under 5%. And
I think it's between 3 and 4%. It was unprecedented.
yeah,
And
no.
again,
Listen,
neither of us
Obama,
are economists, so-
Trump continued the policy what Obama did,
Uh-huh.
and you talk about job growth. You look at the job losses in the farming industry. You look at the end. Trump took office telling the coal miners in West Virginia he was going to save coal jobs. We lost half of the existing coal jobs, disappeared under
We would
Trump.
have lost all of it if Hillary had been elected, because she actually came out and said she wanted to abolish coal. Anyway, look, David, I want to just move back to the story of your book and your dealings with Donald Trump.
Thank you.
Do you think, no, that's why we're here.
Well, I mean, you make a lot of good points. I have to tell you, you make a lot of good points.
Okay.
And I think the one place I completely agree with you is that it's too easy, and we too often just dismiss everything Trump did as useless. And I think that you make very good points and very accurate points about that. Where we disagree is you see that as the outgrowth of some strategic policy, when I see it simply as let's do this and let's do that. Sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it's not.
You think it would have happened anyways? It was all Obama's credit. I get it.
Some of it would have, some of it wouldn't.
Okay. David, I guess that my question to you, and I mean, I could ask the same question of myself, is how much does your ideological orientation, your political beliefs influence, and all of us are, your view of Trump, and how much did that go into your book about Trump?
Well, my book was not about Trump. My book was Trump's campaign book.
Okay.
And
you writing it for his campaign, like kind of like
absolutely
here's the candidate, and
this was the candidate's book.
Okay.
It was called Crippled America. And
look, with absolute due respect, you obviously are not favorable toward Trump. Why would they ask you to write? I mean, that would be like asking, I don't know, some aide to Nixon to write a campaign book for Kennedy. I mean, it's sort of like something doesn't add up.
Well, they asked me because as I said, I have a reputation in the publishing industry of being able to find the core of a book quickly and produce a book, a publishable book, in a very short period of time. I'm good. I have worked with a lot of very quirky personalities and have the ability to get along with people. And Trump was difficult. They were very difficult to get along with him.
Okay.
And so they brought me in. And as I said, at that time, Trump was sort of the New York joke. Nobody.
Oh, I know.
Nobody in New York took him. He was our kind of, nobody took him seriously.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was some hilarious YouTube
video. The concept that he would be the Republican nominee, much less win the election, was nothing. I mean, I remember sitting on an airplane with him.
Yeah.
And when he got the results of an early poll, and he was second in the poll, and he got so excited about it. And I remember how smart, this shows you how smart I am. I remember laughing to myself and thinking, God, he really thinks he has a chance. And um,
Oh, there's some hilarious videos of all the media figures go,
yeah.
oh my God, this is on. He's not going to win. He's not. No, let me. I mean, since you're talking about this, what then do you think was it that did lead him to have this incredible upset victory? Nobody thought he would win. You're absolutely right. There were polls that said Hillary Clinton was going to win by 10 points a week before the election. So what happened?
Well, I think there were a lot of factors, but I don't think it was a pro-Trump election. I think it was an anti-Hillary election. I think a lot of people sat out, and I also think, by the way, that the 2020 election was not a pro-Biden vote either. It was an anti-Trump vote, a referendum on Trump, just like 2016 was a referendum on Hillary.
I think that's a
I think many people didn't vote. They didn't bother to vote. I think she ran an awful campaign. I think she was a terrible candidate, and which was a shame. And I think that because it was not expected to be a contested election, a lot of people who might have voted if it was going to be closer didn't bother to vote. The fact that Democrats lost Michigan, Wisconsin, those were states, had people come out to vote, they would have won those states. And
people did come out to vote. Blue collar workers and laborers came out voting for Trump. I remember, who was it? Sweeney, the head of the AFL-CIO. He was like, look, all of the leadership and the rulers of the labor, we're anti-Trump, but I have to tell you, the rank and file, they love Trump.
Well, I mean, we didn't really know who Trump was at that point.
Trump
did. Was well, that might be, but I mean, he was.
Then you don't think that it was Donald Trump?
Let's put it this way: no president ever has been more entertaining than Trump, ever.
That's true. Maybe even Teddy Roosevelt,
and for better or worse. And so, I think the deep-seated hatred for Hillary, which had been growing and implanted for decades, literally decades.
Sure.
And the fact that she had been essentially anointed by the Democratic Party.
That did annoy people.
And really did not campaign hard at all.
Right.
And was very kind of soft on issues. While Trump was out there every day and I mean, I remember, spending time with some people involved in his campaign and realizing that they did not expect to win. And they were all making deals on the side they were meeting people, networking. It was a shock to the closest people that he won. The only one.
They already had the ball gowns picked out for the inaugural. I mean, absolutely. She had fireworks ready to be fired in Manhattan. Didn't happen. I mean, but I don't think that you then therefore think that it was because Trump was spying for Putin and colluding with Putin to secretly put him in, and he was an illegitimate president. That you don't seem to think that then.
I certainly think there was on some level, Russian involvement.
But it wasn't that Trump was spying for Russia. That was the Mueller. For 3 years we heard nothing but that. President, that the election had been stolen because he colluded with Putin. The government, we spent $40 million so that Mueller and his brown shirts could go all over the world, arresting people and interviewing people. And, I mean, this was, I was getting alerts from the Boston Globe, so-and-so, Stormy Daniels said this. I mean, just this the whole campaign against him, all based upon what I would suggest were lies and that they knew it.
Well, I mean, let me ask you a question. Manafort, who was as close to him as anyone,
Sure.
had more than 50 meetings with Russians.
So didn't
More
Podesta,
than 50.
and he was
His son,
Hillary's campaign manager.
and
Why,
maybe
why
you
didn't
can tell
anyone
me.
talk about that? He did the
No, no.
same
Well,
Manafort did.
Charles,
You know,
I'm not.
in terms of lobbying.
I'm not going to defend.
All right, I'm just saying, if you're going to bring up Manafort,
But you made a point,
yeah,
and I'm just asking questions.
sure.
Why did his son meet with Russian interests and lie about it? Deny the meetings ever took place.
He didn't lie.
Junior did that.
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did.
He met with that Russian woman in a hotel because she wanted to talk about adoption or something like that, and that turned out to be a setup anyway.
In the middle,
He then immediately went to meet with the Hillary campaign people.
Now
that
maybe
was a complete setup.
Maybe,
and I wouldn't want to bring up, by the way, I mean, Trump's son, when you have the other son of Biden involved with incredible corruption.
But let me just say, if that meeting, even if it was perfectly innocent, why was it necessary to lie about it? Why was it necessary? Why was it necessary to say it never took place? Let me present the scenario.
It never took place, in that they were. He was
and now let me respond to the Hunter Biden stuff.
Sure.
His daughter and son-in-law earned $84 million while working in the White House last year. His daughter got 17 trademarks and patents from the Chinese government, including for coffins and voting machines. Now, when you're talking about influence, let's at least look at both sides. I'm not defending Hunter Biden. The only thing I will say about Hunter Biden is there isn't a shred of evidence that Joe Biden did anything untoward.
About the laptop.
No, but there's nothing. There is nothing on the laptop about Joe Biden.
Yes, there was. On the laptop, Hunter Biden says, he was complimenting his own daughter, saying, "You don't have to share your income with the big guy," he called him, and where I give 50% back to the big guy. Who's the big guy? And how much money he was on the
where is the follow the money? Where is the money?
We should follow the money. The problem is you can't follow the money, because when you try to talk about this, and the media tries to talk about it,
I would argue.
I mean, do you know that the big tech took the New York Post, which is the #3 newspaper in the country, and they removed them from all of their social platforms when they reported on Hunter Biden? I mean, the New York Post, that's not some schmuck sitting in his bedroom like me. This is like the #3 paper in the country, and they were censored a few weeks before the election because they reported on the Hunter Biden story.
Well, no,
but we don't get the whole story.
I read the Post every day, just like I read the Daily News, and I keep looking. I keep looking for any evidence that Joe Biden ended up benefiting in the slightest. Let's look at the other side. You want to look at corruption. You look at the Secretary of Commerce, Mills.
Right.
Astonishing. Made somewhere between $25 and $125 million last year doing deals while he was the Secretary of Commerce.
Okay.
You look at the Secretary of Transportation, Chow, who's making deals with her father, who is a Chinese ship owner.
That one is troubling.
And
her husband is Mitch McConnell.
Is Mitch McConnell? Absolutely. And you look at Justice Thomas, and you look at his wife Ginny Thomas, what she is involved with the economics, and he refuses to recuse himself from cases in which his wife has an economic interest. I mean, there is if you look at this, and you're making such a big deal about Hunter Biden. Let's talk about it all. Let's
Fine.
talk about
Let's open up the whole
the
mess.
Trumps. Let's look
Yeah, I think
let's look at Trump's tax returns. Biden has released 100% of his tax returns for 20 years. We know every penny he's earned. I mean,
Well, first of all, according to the FBI investigation, there's evidence that Hunter Biden didn't declare some of these, the 3 billion he got from a Russian oligarch, or the Burisma deal, or the China deal, or these other things.
You're attacking Hunter. You're attacking Joe Biden by claiming his son is corrupt.
That's how the Chinese do it. They don't give the money directly to the politician or his wife or husband. They give it to a surrogate, like a son.
In other words, you mean like, for example, giving trademarks to
okay, fine. I don't know
Trump's
about
daughter.
that. David, look, I feel a little reluctant to even get too far into this, because YouTube might take my channel down if I talk about this, frankly. These things, we're not allowed to discuss these things in this country anymore. We're certainly not allowed to discuss the 2020 election.
And yet here we are discussing it.
We're discussing around the edges. There's a lot I would say, but I know if I did say it in this country right now, I'd be purged. Anyway, look, David, it's great talking with you.
Well, Charles, I enjoy it.
Let me know. Let me know where people. You have a book coming out, or you have a book out. Why don't you talk about?
I do have a. Let me hold it up for you.
Thank you.
This is called the Executive Order, and it's a novel. And I was asked by a publisher several years ago, to do an updated version of the 1935 bestseller, It Can't Happen Here, about how fascism came to America.
Oh, okay.
And
I think we're observing that now.
and this book takes place in the future, after Biden, after Trump, after Biden. It's not necessarily anti-Trump. It's certainly not pro-Biden.
Okay.
And the essence of the book is that we better figure out how to get along, how to talk to each other, because if we don't, we're in serious trouble. And this is an action adventure story. It's a beach read with politics in the background. My protagonist is in a wheelchair, and so he is the first disabled action adventure hero, in which he uses the chair in kind of unique and special ways. The reviews have been wonderful. And the political point is not these guys are good and those guys are bad. It's more, we've got to meet in the middle, and we've got to figure out what we're going to do. Because if we don't, what happens to many years ago, I had a long conversation with Alan Dershowitz, and he told me that in his mind, the single greatest danger facing this country that nobody knows about is the fact that there at this point are more than 700 special powers of the president that have been granted to the president by Congress. The only one that was ever repealed was the right to put Chinese in internment camps. The rest are still on the books.
Yeah.
And given the right situation, they would enable the president to suspend the Constitution. And this is the background of this book.
Incredible. You and
but meanwhile, it's terrorism and chasing stories and doing all that stuff. And I don't want it to sound like a polemic, because it's not.
It's a fun.
It's action adventure, a fun beach read that hopefully will make you think.
Good. No, and by the way, I mean, I probably agree with most of that. And I mean, executive power has increased hugely, as has legislative and judicial power too. And I would even say informal power in the form of an unelected bureaucracy has also expanded immensely in this country. And that's been over probably 100 years. It's not new. But the other thing that you mentioned that I agree with you in is that we're so far apart now on both sides Like I used to interview. I mean, I am on the right. I'm a conservative, but I used to interview Noam Chomsky. I interviewed the late Howard Zinn. I had Gloria Steinem. I used to always like to interview liberals and left wing types because I wanted to find out what made them tick, and we would have a great time, and we would sometimes get emotional, and there might be some ribald comments, but right, I mean, but it was great chance to have an exchange. That doesn't happen anymore. None of them will come on with me now, not because of me personally either. They just don't. Nobody talks to the other side. It's on both sides, not just.
Well, I one of the a significant change that has not yet been factored into our politics, as far as I'm concerned, is the internet, which has changed the world in ways that no one could have anticipated. And one of the things it has done is it has recreated tribal loyalties. And it enables politicians to reach their niche, which can be very narrow, but they could not have afforded to speak to before the internet. So what that tends to do is reinforce and harden political beliefs and political, in other words, it's if you want to, watching for us liberals, watching what's going on in the Republican Party is beyond fascinating. This loyalty to Trump, denying reality, refusing to, they held 11 congressional hearings about Benghazi, but refused to vote for a single hearing about January 6th.
Well, that would have been a politicized event. I mean, if they really.
What was Benghazi?
Well, Benghazi, 4 men were killed. I mean, look, as far as January 6th goes, I would like to see them release all the videos that Pelosi refuses to release and find out whether or not
the fact that they would not
co-conspirators were FBI agents. I mean, there's a lot of things that, but the problem with that is that if they have that hearing with Pelosi in charge of Congress,
Charles, let me
political
interrupt you again, because you talked about the problem with Benghazi is 4 people were killed.
Yes.
The Secretary of Defense under Trump, and the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump appointed, did exactly the same thing that happened in Benghazi, in that he had 2 soldiers down at night who were dying, and he refused to send helicopters. Exactly the same thing.
I don't recall.
And he admitted it, and he will tell you about it, because he said he would not commit other troops into a volatile situation in which he did not
lie about it.
You don't know about it, but it was literally exactly the same situation. So now and you're telling me Benghazi was not political.
Well, the difference is he didn't lie about it. Obviously, he told you. You seem to know about it. I mean, it sounds like it's a war situation, and a very tough decision was made. But to go back to my original point here, things have gotten very divided, and you make a good point with regard to the influence of the internet. That's a very broad and interesting subject. I would suggest it also has to do with the open partisanship and politicalization of the media, mainstream media, something that Lester Holt recently bragged about when he received an award at a ceremony. And that, to me, has discredited the media. You have a poll recently which shows that over 60% of the American people no longer trust the mainstream media, which is not good for this country. And you don't even have a semblance of pretending that there's objectivity.
Yeah, but Charles,
now the New York Times and the rest of them will go out with a story during Trump based on one anonymous source, and then the next day they retract it after the damage has been done.
Yeah, but Charles,
that happened over and over again.
You just said,
and it was used as a way to promote and craft a certain outcome. And that, to me, has discredited that.
You just said that the Post certainly a
Yeah, the one
far
exception. And look
right
what
newspaper.
happened. Not far
It's
right.
a, it,
They're
it,
not
they're,
far right. And
you
look what
know,
happened. They were taken down for 2 weeks. They finally look. Michael Smerconish, you know who he is in Philadelphia. Good talk show host, left of center, but reasonable, normal. He's a lawyer. He thinks issues through. He made a comment early in the Trump administration on his radio show where he mildly said something good about Trump, that he had done something that he thought was a good thing. The death threats, the hate mail, the boycotts, his sponsors, who people have been with him for decades, suddenly getting calls, they're going to withdraw. So he changed his mind and he went back to the party line. Now that's a politicization of the media. They're not going to be objective. They were not objective. They had an agenda that went right up to the election day, but we can't talk about that. Anyway, David, look, are there any websites you'd like to share so that people can get?
well,
By the way, your book is excellent.
I'll tell you my kind of go-to website. And I've done a series of books that have been very successful with Dan Abrams.
Okay.
About the new one that just came out. They're centered around trials that and the law that people do not know much about. The one that just came out is called Kennedy's Avenger, which is the Jack Ruby trial, which is where the entire Kennedy conspiracy industry began. And it's a bizarre, incredibly strange, funny trial. And Dan has a website, I don't know if you know it, called Mediaite. And Mediaite, you will like Mediaite because they really do a great job of presenting both sides.
Okay.
Mediaite, and so I can really, you will find half of Mediaite you will rail against, and half you'll be nodding your head and saying, there it is. So the answer is, what website it would be? It would be Mediaite.
I'll check that out. I mean, I've heard of it.
Please do.
And he's pretty good. I mean, he kind of made his bones on the Florida recount, I recall, between Bush and Gore. I remember that he was like on the steps of the Supreme Court. That's when he became known. All right. So David Fisher, listen, I want to thank you for joining me. It's been a very interesting talk.
Well, it's delightful, and I've enjoyed it. And thank you for your time.
All right. Thanks so much. All right. Take care.
Bye, Charles. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. So David Fisher is with me there. His website, by the way, is dfisher.com, where he's ghostwritten and co-written and written just a very solid and broad cross-section of books dealing with American figures in politics and culture. He did do a book on Theodore Roosevelt. That's interesting. Oh, Dan Abrams. Okay. William Shatner, I'm looking at here. The U.S. Marshals. That's interesting. A friend of mine might be interested in that, who works with the U.S. Marshals. So check out his website. It is, again, dfisher.com. And thanks so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Charles.
All right, David. Thank you.
I appreciate it a lot.
You bet. Take care.